Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Web3 Coffee. This week, I want to explore the topic of Bitcoin strategic reserves. We'll look at some of the countries that have already implemented this type of reserve, what has been the implications of that, as well as looking towards the future and which countries are likely to adopt it, and what that could mean for both traditional finance as well as the crypto sector. So let's get started. So, as most of you know, I think Donald Trump is the man who's kind of brought the idea of a Bitcoin strategic reserve to the limelight. I think it makes sense for us to start off our conversation talking about him because he had quite a weekend right before he gets inaugurated. By the time this episode's out, who knows? Not only would he be inaugurated, but we might also have an executive order for a Bitcoin strategic reserve in the United States. Um, but in terms of Trump's weekend, right? I think literally right after Gary Gensler tendered his resignation, I'm not sure if the timing was related, but 30 minutes after the tweet about Gensler resigning, Trump released his own meme coin, the only official Trump meme coin, aptly titled Trump. And this blew up. I'm talking zero to almost $50 billion in less than 48 hours. I think it's been pretty much the largest value creation of anything in the crypto sphere. And it's certainly, love him or hate him, it certainly bodes well for his initial intentions for crypto in the United States. I don't want to get into long-term implications because, it's honestly anyone's guess. Frankly, I doubt anyone, even internally on Trump's team, is very clear what the long-term plan is here, and it'll be taken on a, at best 6 month strategy window. Um, but why I think it's interesting to talk about that area first, or the Trump meme coin first, is because the success of this will likely give him more ammunition, more support in more pro crypto policies at the beginning of his tenure as president. Some people are predicting we might even see an executive order for a Bitcoin strategic reserve by the day he gets inaugurated. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, generally presidents, the day of, like, their first day, there are quite a few executive orders passed. And given he's talked about a Bitcoin strategic reserve for a while, it's certainly very possible we'll see it. By the time this episode's out, it'll likely be after that. So, let's see. Now, before we get to the crux of today's show, I think it's important that we define exactly what a strategic reserve is. And at its core, a strategic reserve is a stockpile of something that's systemically important to a nation. It's kept to manage serious disruptions in supply. The most famous example is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States. It was created in response to the 1973 1974 Arab oil embargo, and it's been tapped multiple times to maintain stability in the energy markets. For instance, it was used to help reduce inflationary pressure on energy prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And when managed well, these strategic reserves, they can be sold off when prices are high and brought back down when prices are low. And, this is obviously a very compelling investment proposition, therefore. So now, what about a Bitcoin strategic reserve, right? Proponents of the idea see Bitcoin as a national and economic security asset, much like oil or gold. But, you know, frankly, Bitcoin doesn't serve the same function as oil in the US economy, right? Oil powers daily lives. It's become one of the essential building blocks of the economy. Whereas Bitcoin, that really isn't the case. However, the scarcity and store of value properties of Bitcoin make it a super compelling investment, and more finding ways to hedge against inflation risk of your domestic currency, your domestic fiat currency, will become critical, because we're certainly entering a phase of unprecedented debt at the national or country level. And the only way to combat this will be through assets like Bitcoin. I think it's poignant to point out exactly how other countries that have adopted Bitcoin strategic reserves have performed. And one of the best examples is clearly El Salvador. El Salvador, for many years, has allowed Bitcoin as a means of payment, and the country has been acquiring Bitcoin assets on the at the national level for a while. Their investment has, of course, been super positive for the country's economy, and the reality is, especially if you're in a country which doesn't have the strongest economic output, right? How do you protect your currency against the inflationary spirals that we're seeing with so many countries across the world? One of the best solutions really seems to be using Bitcoin. Now, the reality is Bitcoin is a new asset class. It is highly volatile. So these short-term experiments, like what we've seen with El Salvador, does that speak to the long-term success of Bitcoin as a national currency? It's unclear. But regardless of that, El Salvador and the leading politicians there are pushing ahead with the plan. They're continuing to acquire additional BTC. There has been some pushback from the IMF, but I think their strategy has been so successful, right, that it's hard for anyone to advise them to not continue with it in some level, right? And clearly, we're going to see more and more countries take the approach of accepting Bitcoin. The reality is that it's becoming more and more prevalent. And one thing I've noticed is that you can never successfully ban software. And generally, banning software, oftentimes leads to more use of that software. And that's what I'm seeing with Bitcoin. The countries that are forward and accept it sooner generally will be the ones to benefit more from it. I think another example is I saw Phuket in Thailand recently announced they'd be accepting Bitcoin. So with all of that said, I think a Bitcoin strategic reserve is going to be hugely beneficial for the crypto industry. It is another step in not only democratizing access, but institutionalizing the asset class. The reality is, when a country starts accumulating Bitcoin, especially a country like the United States, it is a wake-up call to financial asset managers across the world. And, especially with Trump coming to the White House and what we've seen in terms of his actions recently, I definitely predict an executive order in the very early days of his presidency regarding Bitcoin, perhaps even on his first day. I think maybe I'll just leave us with this one clip from the recent crypto ball that was held on Friday, backed by Trump. Clearly, his advisors and his team are going to be pushing a pro-crypto narrative. So I think it is a really strong time to get more involved in the blockchain and Web3 space. And I look forward to having more discussions with all of you through this channel. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.
The reign of terror against crypto is over. And the beginning of innovation in America for crypto has just begun.